c'est bien.
Excellent.
On peut zoomer un peu, hein, ça va?
Ça va, hein?
Bien, je suis vraiment très heureux et
I'm very
honoré
happy and honored
que Michel Pierre-Louis et Eva Joly aient
welcome
accepté
Michel Pierre-Louis and Eva Joly
d'intervenir en clôture de ce colloque.
for closing this conference. I've known them for quite some time, but I respected them before that. I've known them through their action before knowing them personally. And
ce sont deux personnalités
they are
très importantes
key figures
de l'action pour le développement
in
et pour la
development
culture.
action.
Michel,
in action for a culture. Michel is very active in Haiti, but Haiti is an international symbol. Haiti is a country that has had an international dimension since it was created as a state. It is the embodiment of the liberation of the slave.
C'est la... Je dis, puisque j'enseigne aux États-Unis,
I say that because I teach in the
la
US.
première partie du 19e
I say that in the
siècle,
first half of the
Haïti était la
19th
seule
century,
république
Haiti
dont
was the
les
only
habitants
republic whose inhabitants were all free because France was no longer a republic.
avaient encore des esclaves.
The US
Ça,
still had
faut le présenter
slaves,
comme cela,
and so that's the way we
parce que
should
ça
put it,
montre un
because
peu,
it shows
ce que représente Haïti
what
pour,
Haiti
pour
is
l'humanité.
for humanity.
Et Haïti
And
l'a payé
Haiti
très cher, et nous, la France, lui avons
paid
payé
the
très
price
cher,
for that.
les États-Unis
France
aussi. Et donc, je pense que,
punished
voilà, quand on pense à
Haiti for that, the
Haïti,
US too.
il y
And
a
when we think about
une
Haiti,
histoire partagée.
there is a shared
Ce sont nos
history.
cousins, les Haïtiens,
The
les
Haitian
cousins que
population
la Révolution française
is our
a unis
cousins.
et ensuite séparés.
Cousins
Et donc,
we were
on est
separated
vraiment très
from
heureux
by the
que Michel,
Republic.
qui est à la
And we're
tête
very happy to have Michelle with
vraiment
us.
de la fondation
She is at the head of the Foundation for Culture and
du
Education,
pays,
which is the most
qui est resté
important in the
debout,
country, and that
à
remained
travers aussi bien
standing
d'ailleurs les différentes crises politiques,
through the various political
les
crises,
évolutions politiques très diverses
political
que l'on connaît,
changes experienced by the
que à
country,
travers,
and
drames,
through the tragedies,
humanitaires qu'ont provoqué
humanitarian
aussi bien,
tragedies
tremblements de terre que les épidémies, etc.
that are the consequences of the earthquake
Michel a aussi
and
été Premier ministre.
epidemics. Michel was Prime Minister under President Préval. She knows about policies in addition to education and culture, and she has this double hat. And so she is the most appropriate, so to speak, person to take the floor at the end of this colloquium. Thank you, Michel.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you
Patrick,
very
pour
much.
tes mots
Thank you,
d'introduction.
Patrick, for your kind words.
Et je vous remercie tous d'être là.
I thank you all for being here today. I'd like to thank Patrick, Jérémy Lachal,
L'ambassadeur Christian Conan.
Ambassador Christian
De
Conan.
revoir en Haïti avec
It was a
vous
pleasure for
dernièrement.
me to meet him
Et
again
toute
in
l'équipe
Haiti
de
recently with
Bibliothèques
you,
sans
and
frontières
the whole team
de
of
m'avoir invité
Libraries
à
Without
cette
Borders
importante
for having
conférence
invited me
sur
to this important conference on
L'idée
the
de mettre la
urgency of
lecture, le
reading.
livre,
The
au
idea
cœur
of putting
de l'humanitaire
reading and books at
vient
the
combler
heart
un
of humanitarian
vide
approach
qui n'a que trop
fills
persisté
a
dans le
gap
temps,
that lasted
en
too
ignorant
long
une dimension
when we
absolument
ignored an
importante
absolutely
de toute vie
essential
humaine,
dimension of
la
any
vie de
human
l'esprit,
life, the life
celle qui
of
se fait
mindset
penser.
of the
Ça me fait
spirit,
penser à ce que disait
the
M.
life that
Delivois
is thought.
ce
It
matin
reminds me
en
of what M.
faisant
Dorivois said
référence
this morning,
à un jeune enfant
referring
à
to a
qui
young
demandait,
kid
mais comment
to
est-ce que
whom
tu vas
he
t'en
asked,
sortir?
how will you
Je vais penser.
recover? And the kid said, I will
La vie de
think.
l'esprit, celle qui se fait
So the
penser,
life
celle qui se
of
fait
the
frayage,
spirit,
et qui appelle au
the
dépassement de
life
la dureté des
that
situations
goes
de vie.
beyond the difficulty of
permet de
crisis situation, the life that transcends, the life that put difference at the very heart of the relationship with others. How to have such life without books, mobilizing conscience on the part played by books and reading in emergency and desperate situations, human disaster or natural disaster, conflicts, any kind of conflicts. I think I have believed in that approach for many years, and I put it in practice on a very modest scale, and that gave us a lot of hope. Living in Haiti is, in a way, living in emergency situations. It means, on a daily basis, living, experiencing insecurity and safety, little security, precariousness. It's leaving one's home without being sure that one came back to their home at night. And when we are aware of that, you tend to go to what's essential. You do away with the unuseful things, and you focus on critical thinking, and you think about books differently, books for you and for others. In a very beautiful essay, Le Don des Morts, Daniel Salnave says so with strength, and I quote, one book would suffice. A book that goes from one hand to another. Its white sheets and pages reflect the light. Instantly, we see everything, the beauty of dreams. We only need one book. End of quote. Jean-Paul Sartre, in Les mots, the words, I'll end my life as I started it, in the middle of books. But I had, as far as I'm concerned, I was happy to be born in a family where books mattered. My father was the head of the secondary school, or the high school of a province where I was born. He was a teacher of Greek, Latin literature. He learned those disciplines even though he had never left the country. In this paradoxical Haiti, where illiteracy reached already 80% of the population, reading was already a privilege. This exceptional situation was reminded every evolution of the country. My father said, we are a small country affected by all evils. Think it is the only condition to keep our dignity. Read, it will be the means, the only means to travel, to learn the history of the country, to know the world, and to get out of our island. I listened to what he said, to the word. I learned very early the urgency of reading. When I studied in the US in the 70s, I wanted to work in the New York Public Library to pay for my tuition fees. When I got the job, I worked at the Library for the Performing Arts, or Lincoln Center. When I had free time, I was reading whatever I could get my hands on the history of music, dance, theater, authors, their lives, their work. 2 years later, I was transferred to the public library of at the corner of 42nd and the 5th Avenue. It was, I wanted to read a lot before coming back to my countries. For 6 years, I did so. I did not want to talk about me, but I thought maybe it was useful to talk about the actions I would develop later when I was lucky to meet George Soros, the father of Alexander. And George asked me to head in Haiti a foundation called Connaissance et Liberté Focal. One of its objectives is to promote education, culture, and values of a democratic society. society.
Mes collègues et moi
My
avons choisi
colleagues
de
and
mettre en
I
œuvre un
have
programme
chosen
de
to put in
bibliothèques de
place
proximité
outreach
à Port-au-Prince
library
et dans les
programs in
régions
Port au
reculées du
Prince
pays pour donner accès
and
aux
in
livres et à la
landlocked
lecture.
areas to give access to
Et
the
plus
book
récemment,
and
Première ministre
reading.
d'Haïti,
More
je
recently,
m'étais
when I
engagée
was the
avec mon
Prime
ministre
Minister
de
of
la
Haiti,
Culture
I
à
committed, along with
créer
my
ce
Minister
qu'on a
for
appelé des
Culture,
éclats, espaces de culture,
to
de lecture et
creating
d'animation
éclats,
dans les lycées
spaces for
publics du
cultural
pays. Nous en
reading
avions
and
créé à peu
animation
près 5 ou 6
in
avant que
public
ne laisse
high
le
schools
gouvernement.
in the
Nous
country.
devions en créer plus de
We were
200.
supposed to create 200
Mais
of them. We
quelques années
created
auparavant,
2000.
j'avais vécu des
But
expériences
years
qui m'avaient
before that, I had
profondément marqué.
experienced things that really affected
Tout un
me.
concours de circonstances m'avait porté, en effet,
I
à
was led to
alphabétiser un groupe de paysans du plateau
teach
central,
reading and
conférence.
writing to a group of
Et j'eus un jour une idée
farmers
fort
in
audacieuse,
Plateau Central. And
celle
one
de
day I
leur
had a
parler
bold
de
idea,
philosophie.
that of talking about philosophy
Je me suis dit, peut-être
to
que
them.
ce serait
And I
intéressant
thought it would be
de leur
interesting
expliquer
to
l'allégorie de la
explain
cave du
the
livre
allegory
7 de la
of the
République
cave
d'Arabie.
of Book 7 of the
Aujourd'hui
Republic
encore, je
by
vois leur
Plato.
regard
Again,
avide.
I see their
J'entends leur
look
silence respectueux
hungry for knowledge.
lorsque je
I
conclus
hear
par les
their
paroles de
respectful
Socrate à
silence when I conclude by
Chacun possède
this
la
sentence.
faculté
Everybody
d'apprendre
has the
et l'organe destiné à cet
ability to
usage
learn, and
est
the
semblable à
organ
des yeux qui ne
aimed at
pourraient se
such
tourner qu'avec le
learning,
corps tout entier des ténèbres vers la
well,
lumière.
this organ
Cet organe doit aussi se
must
détourner avec l'âme tout entière de ce qu'il naît,
think about what's
jusqu'à ce qu'il
born
devienne
and must
capable
be
de
able
supporter la
to
vue de
bear
l'être
the vision
et de ce
of
qu'il y a
the
de plus
being
lumineux
and
dans
of
l'être.
what's more
Et
luminous
cela,
in
nous
the
l'appelons le
being.
bien, n'est-ce
And
pas?
that's what we call the good,
Oui,
isn't
répondons-nous.
it?
Et Socrate de continuer.
And it
L'éducation
goes
est donc
on.
l'art qui se
Education
propose
is the
ce
art
but, la
that sets
conversion
that
de
goal,
l'âme, et qui
changing the
recherche les
soul,
moyens les plus
and that
aisés et les
looks
plus
for
efficaces
the
de l'opérer.
easiest and the most
Elle ne
efficient ways to
consiste pas
do
à donner
so.
la vue à l'organe de
Education
l'âme,
does not
puisqu'il l'a
give
déjà.
a sight to
Mais comme il
the
est mal
organ of the
tourné et ne
soul,
regarde pas où il faudrait,
but helps
elle
it
s'efforce de l'amener
watching
dans la
in the
bonne
right
direction.
direction.
Et je traduisais en créole.
And I was translating that in Creole. And then I
Sur
had their
eux-mêmes,
reaction
sur leur propre vie d'exclus,
on their lives as
n'était-elle pas
people
semblable, cette vie,
sidelined.
à celle de ceux
They
qui
had the same
enfermés dans la
kind of
caverne,
life as those
enchaînés les uns aux autres, sont
locked
condamnés à ne
in
voir
that
que les
cave,
ombres.
chained to one another,
Comment sortir
watching
des
only
ténèbres et
shadows.
accéder à la
How
lumière?
could they get out
Nous en
of those
redemandons.
shadows and get
Après
access to
Platon,
the light?
j'ai osé
After
aborder
Plato,
le sapere aude
I
de Kant et le cogito de
started
Descartes.
talking about
Et
the
toujours
sapere
les mêmes
aude of
interrogations
Kant
sur
and the
eux-mêmes, sur
cogito
le
of
temps,
Descartes.
sur ces
They always
paroles de
ask the same
philosophes
questions
écrites et dites depuis des
about time,
millénaires,
about the
pour
words
certains,
of those
des
philosophers
siècles,
that
pour
were
d'autres,
written
et qui, chez
since
ces hommes et femmes
centuries,
laissés pour compte,
thousands of
trouvaient
years,
une résonance
and
et provoquaient un déclic.
in them something
Au final,
clicked. At the end of the
J'entends
day,
encore le
I
verdict
hear
d'un vieux paysan.
the
Vous
verdict
savez,
of
Madame
old
Michel, savoir lire et
farmers,
écrire aurait changé
knowing
notre
how
vie,
to read and
notre
write
regard sur nous-mêmes.
would have changed our life, the way we see
Comment,
ourselves
forte
and the
de
way
cette
we see the
expérience,
world.
Et d'autres aussi, ne pas continuer à s'engager dans
So I
cette voie.
continued in
Lire, faire
that
lire dans
path,
l'urgence.
reading,
En effet, en
having people
1992, nous
read
sommes en plein coup
in
d'État. La
urgency.
répression militaire
In
fait rage dans les quartiers
1992, we are
populaires.
experiencing a coup.
Les jeunes
There
surtout
is
sont
a
ciblés.
military
Ces demandeurs de
repression,
démocratie,
and young
d'égalité et
people
de
that
justice.
demand democracy,
Par
equality,
un concours de
and justice are
circonstances,
targeted.
encore un, je suis appelé à
Again,
travailler avec un groupe de
For
jeunes
various
dans un quartier
reasons,
défavorisé
I
de
start working
Port-au-Prince.
in a
Ils
disadvantaged
ne sont
area of
qu'une
Port-au-Prince with young
quinzaine, de
people.
18
There
à
are only
25 ans,
15 people,
mais ils rayonnent
aged
dans leur
18 to
quartier.
25, but
Tandis que des rafales d'armes
they
automatiques se font
are very
entendre
important in the
tous les jours,
neighborhood. And
à quelques
every
distances
day,
du lieu de nos rencontres,
when we
que des
meet,
cadavres jonchent les
we
rues
see
à quelques
corpses
mètres de là.
on the floor,
Ces
we
jeunes
hear
disent vouloir
shootings,
créer
and
un
those
club
young
de
people want to
lecture
create a
et
book
une
club
bibliothèque.
and a library.
Comme par hasard. Une idée surprenante
It
que
was a
j'accueille
surprising
avec joie.
idea that I welcomed.
Alors on se met au
So
travail.
we started
Les
working,
questions se succèdent. Qu'est-ce qu'une
asking
bibliothèque
questions.
pour ceux
What
qui
is a
n'ont pas de
library for
livres
those who do
et
not
qui n'ont
have
pas
books
l'habitude de
and that
lire,
are not
qui n'ont
used
pas
to
accès aux
reading,
livres?
who do not have
Qu'est-ce que
access
cela peut bien
to the
vouloir
book?
dire
What
d'avoir
does
une
it mean
bibliothèque dans ce
having a library
quartier,
in that
dans ces temps
neighborhood
mortifères?
in
Qui lit ici
those
aujourd'hui? Quel
difficult
type de
times?
livre?
Who is
Vous
reading?
les
What
jeunes qui
kinds of
voulez une
book?
bibliothèque et
You
un
want a
club de
library,
lecture, lisez-vous? Que lisez-vous? Où?
a book
À
club?
quel moment de la
What do
journée,
you
puisqu'il n'y a
read?
pas
Where?
d'électricité dans les maisons pour
And
lire le
when?
soir?
Because you do not have
Pourquoi une
electricity in your houses. Why do you want a
effet de
library?
mode?
Is it just fashion?
Autant de questions qui ont fait
Those
débat.
were many
Mais
questions
lorsqu'ils ont
that were
confessé avoir
controversial,
eux-mêmes peu lu,
but when they
ayant tous
admitted
été
that
scolarisés dans
they
des
read
écoles de
only
qualité
a
plutôt
little,
médiocres,
even
je décidai de
though
travailler
they
des
were
textes
enrolled
avec eux, et enseigner
in
à
schools,
lire,
but in
ensemble,
mediocre
à haute
school,
voix,
I
à
decided
déchiffrer des
working
mots,
with them.
dictionnaire en main,
We
à
started reading
comprendre, à
aloud,
faire sens,
deciphering
avec un
words,
sens de
trying
l'urgence.
to
Il fallait faire
understand
vite,
with
comme si le temps
this
était
feeling of
compté, qu'il fallait
emergency,
profiter de l'instant.
as if time were
Nous
limited
étions en
and we had to make the most of
1992.
the
Jacques Attali
moment.
venait de
It was
publier
1992.
1492.
Jacques Attali
Nous
had
nous
just
sentions
published
concernés.
1492 and we feel
500 ans de
concerned.
conquête,
500
de
years of
colonisation,
conquest,
d'esclavage, de
colonization,
révolution,
slavery,
d'émancipation.
revolution,
Nous lisions tous les jours, dimanche
empowerment.
compris, jour de
Every
l'an
day
compris.
we
Et
read,
les jeunes
even on
apprenaient,
Sundays,
discutaient,
and
s'enthousiasmaient,
young
faisaient
people
des
learned
relations
and
avec notre
discussed,
propre histoire,
were
ce dont
enthusiastic.
vient de rappeler Patrick. C'était sérieux. D'ailleurs, trop
It was
sérieux pour ces
serious.
jeunes
It
qui
was too
croyaient que
serious
lire
for
ne
those
pouvait
young
se faire
people that
qu'avec des livres
thought that
sérieux. Il fallait
reading
donc démystifier les
could
idées
only
toutes
be
faites sur le
done
roman, sur la
seriously.
littérature.
So
Et je me rappelle ce
I
qu'a dit
remember
hier,
what Alexandre
sur la
said yesterday
littérature,
about
dans
literature.
Proust. Moi, je vais encore citer
He
Daniel
quoted
Salnave,
Proust.
qui, dans la
I'm going to
première
quote
des
Daniel
11
Salnave
propositions en
in the
hommage à
first
Paul
of
Ricoeur,
the
en hommage à temps et
first
récit
of
de
the
Paul
11
Ricoeur, publié dans la revue
proposals
d'Esprit,
to pay
disait
tribute to
ceci:
temps et récit.
Nul ne lirait de livre,
of Paul
nul n'en
Ricoeur.
écrirait s'il n'était animé de cette
She
double
said,
certitude en apparence contradictoire. Que la littérature l'arrache au monde, que la
takes you
littérature
away
lui
from the
lui
world,
assure une prise
and
sur le
literature
monde.
helps
En
you
d'autres termes, que si elle suspend ce monde
understanding the world.
ou l'annule,
If literature
c'est pour lui
suspends this world
substituer un
or
monde
cancel it,
absolument vrai,
it's to
plus
substitute it
vrai
with
que le
a
monde réel.
truer world,
Et pour
truer
ne pas
than the real
dépayser ces
world.
jeunes, je leur proposais toute une série
order
de
not
livres, y
to,
compris des livres des romanciers haïtiens.
To please
Et
those
puis, ils choisirent
young
la
people,
série
they
des
chose
Rougon-Macquart.
the
Zola.
Rougon-Macquart series
En
of
commençant
Zola.
par la fortune de
They
Rougon.
started
Et
with
vous
La
savez
Fortune
pourquoi?
de Rougon.
Parce
You
qu'elle
know
fait
why?
le récit
Because
du coup
it
d'État de
tells about
1851
the
en France. Et
1852
nous
coup
étions en
in
plein coup d'État.
France.
Et puis, naturellement, pour retrouver quelques repères, nous lûmes aussi
To find our
Jean
bearings,
Métellus,
we read together
Lionel
Jean
Trouillot,
Métellus,
des poètes,
Lionel
romanciers, essayistes,
Trouillot,
linguistes,
novelist,
d'origine haïtienne aussi, d'origine
Haitian
haïtienne, qui vivent en France,
writers
ou
living in
d'origine
France
haïtienne,
or
vivant en Haïti,
living in Haiti,
pour que s'incarne quelque peu la
in
double
order
certitude
to
évoquée par Daniel
talk
Salnave.
about the
Et
paradox
lorsqu'après une
that
année
just
de lecture et
mentioned.
de
After
discussion
1
dans
year
ce
of
temps mort
reading and
d'une
discussions in that
dictature
difficult
militaire
time
sans
of a
grandeur,
military
je fus
dictatorship, I
invité au
was
Japon
invited
pour
in
recevoir un
Japan
prix
to receive a
pour mon
prize
engagement
for
dans
my
l'éducation et
commitment in
l'alphabétisation.
education and
J'ai
literacy,
décidé
and I
d'investir les
decided to
fonds qui
invest
m'avaient
the
été
funds that
accordés
were
dans la
given to me
création d'une
in the
petite
creation of a
bibliothèque de
small
quartier
neighborhood
dans ce
library
quartier en déshérence,
in
avec un
this
fonds de livres de 300
disadvantaged
titres
area with
offerts en
300
don
books
par
that
des
were
amis de la
donated
place.
by
Pour eux,
friends.
pour ces jeunes qui avaient
For
eu
those young
jusque-là la
people
ténacité
that
d'aller
wanted
au bout d'un rêve.
to believe in
L'expérience ne
their
s'arrêtait
dream,
pas
and
là.
our experience
Il
did
fallait
not
faire
stop
de ce
here.
petit espace
We
un
wanted
lieu
to
de
make that
rencontre,
small
une
space a
passerelle
place
vers
where
les
people
autres,
meet, a
auteurs,
bridge
poètes, journalistes,
towards
féministes,
others,
éducateurs,
a place
artistes,
where
qui
writers,
autrement
poets,
n'auraient
journalists,
jamais eu
feminists,
l'occasion de
educators,
dialoguer
artists
avec les
met
jeunes de ce quartier,
in order
de
to
leur parler de
dialogue
leur
with young
métier,
people
de
in
leur
that
création, de
neighborhood
leur
in order
vie,
for them to talk
et aussi d'apprendre
about their life, about their
lors de
creation,
séances
about
tenues le plus souvent le
their
soir
trade.
à la lueur d'une bougie.
And very often
Ce
we had
brassage
those
social et
debates at
culturel
night
deviendra aussi une
around
constante.
a candle.
Lorsque l'année d'après, j'ai
That
l'occasion, comme je l'ai
melting
dit plus haut,
pot
de créer Focal, la
happened on a
Fondation
regular
Connaissance et
basis
Liberté,
when
de mettre en
I
œuvre dans tout le pays un
met
réseau de
the-
petites bibliothèques communautaires
when I
de
created the
proximité,
Fondation
gérées
Connaissance
par des
and
jeunes,
Focal.
et de créer ainsi des passerelles
And so
entre
we
différents
build
secteurs
bridges
de la
between
société
different sectors of
qui ont si peu
society that
l'occasion de se
meet
rencontrer.
only
Il fallait donner accès aux livres, à l'information, à la culture.
not,
Il fallait former,
not too often.
apprendre à gérer, à
So we had
conserver,
to
à
learn
animer,
to manage, to
démocratiser l'accès
moderate,
du livre,
democratize access
faire
to
de ces
the
espaces des
book,
lieux fédérateurs,
make
des
those
lieux
spaces
inclusifs, puisque même ceux qui ne
places
savaient
where
pas
everybody is
lire pouvaient y
included,
trouver
even
leur
those who
compte.
do not know
Ou
how
en
to
plus
read.
justement de l'accès aux
And
livres,
in
tout
addition
pouvait
to the
y
access
faire
to the
objet de
book,
débat.
everything could
La
be debated,
citoyenneté, les
citizenship,
élections,
elections,
l'équité de genre, la
gender
drogue, la
equality,
sexualité,
drugs,
l'histoire, le cinéma,
sexuality, history, cinema, etc. In 15 years, we created a whole network of small community libraries in the more remote regions of the country, thanks to a cooperation with the French Foundation specialized in solar energy, Fondem, that were presented to us by the French Association supported our action. We were able to create 20 of such libraries with solar panels that produced electricity in areas without access to electricity. And those libraries became cultural centers. There were electricity at night, access to IT, to the internet, to audiovisual material were made possible. And so these new technologies help people be connected and communicate. It was essential to meet with the diaspora and to talk with the diaspora when the internet access was possible.
It was extremely difficult, impossible sometimes, to convince donors of the significance of libraries. I am delighted that here we have someone representing the Gates Foundation. When they launched their program on young leaders and innovation in education, well, one of our young moderators in the Focal Library received this prize, and he was in Rotterdam last week, participated in a great meeting organized by the Gates Foundation, and I can only be delighted when our young people are able to benefit from those advantages. Yet it is very difficult to convince donors. Everything happened as aid programs towards Haiti could only be from a basic humanitarian nature to respond to the primary needs of the population. I have nothing against it, but it is reducing the vision of poor countries that built and that is still existing today. This made a young person cry out during a training for technicians in library. I quote, "Why do the donors think that we do need only rice and maize? Why do they refuse to fund libraries? We are not just stomachs. We also need something to feed our thoughts." End of quote. Fortunately, the Open Society Foundations of George Soros believed in it. It continued to support our efforts in this domain and allowed us to construct a cultural center in Port-au-Prince, which today is one of the rare institutions that was not touched by the earthquake. The library of this cultural center receives 1,000 people per day and has over 25,000 members. For Port-au-Prince, this is a lot. In the neighboring regions, 2 of our small libraries were destroyed, and we are grateful to the American Library Association, the Association of American Librarians, which raised funds for us and allowed us to rebuild those libraries. When it comes to new technologies, we were able to make our library an IT library and create modules, training, distance training via internet. This allows us to train and follow up the activities of libraries, which has to be found in remote areas with a difficult access. After the earthquake, of course, we were not struck, but still, the library received thousands and thousands of people coming from the district who lost their house. They stayed for about 3 months, and we had to feed them, to entertain them. And the pressure of young people, it's exactly what Patrick said. The pressure of the young people was such that we had to reopen the library a lot sooner than expected, because young people wanted to read, but wanted to say, to tell, to verbalize what had happened to us. And they wanted to hear the experience of the others, share it, and in this recognition, feel included and not isolated. So we need to invest in books. On a daily basis, we need to promote books and reading, of course, taking into consideration the reflection that was made before. This fight is our fight. Is this a reason why the initiative by Libraries Without Borders on the urgency of reading in humanitarian crisis situations is personally particularly important for me and for my colleagues in Focal? Well, I feel even more concerned that it is Libraries Without Borders involvement in the post-earthquake situation in Haiti that contributed to create this mobilization around the urgency of leader. I want to pay tribute to BSF's approach after the earthquakes in Haiti. They took part in meeting all the stakeholders, public, non-public, the Direction Nationale du Livre, the National Library, Focal, editors, professional and experts from the book industry, and they committed together with them in the implementation of the project of a digital library in the Faculty of Sciences in the State University of Haiti, as well as Biblio Tap Tap. In Haiti, Tap Tap are the minibuses transporting people everywhere, which are with many drawings, as you probably know. So Biblio Tap Tap with the Tap Tap library, which go in the popular districts in order to bring books, magazines, etc. to those who wouldn't have access to them. But still, it is important to mention what Paul Ricoeur called the meeting between the world of the text and the world of the reader. And maybe there we faced a great difficulty and had difficulty, that is to say, how complex it is to read. Of course, we need to grant access to a book, and we have in Haiti a real appetite to make sure that everywhere reading and books are promoted, but still it was quite difficult when we had some deficits in the school where the educative system does not promote training and reading. So how can we act? Only if the action is enshrined on the long-term approach. Is this a reason why the urgent action can not only be thought about in emergency, but it needs to last, because emergency stretches out in time. So at the heart of this paradoxical activity, we need to locate the action. And this is very difficult for us as well. Of course, we need funding. We heard the representative of the Red Cross in order to be able to continue in time. And we need to defend our thoughts in order for moderators as well to read themselves and to make other people read. I know that Libraries Without Borders wants to create a book central for the Haitian academicians, and I encourage them to do so, because we need to create a critical mass of readers, high-level readers, who can irrigate the other levels of the system. To conclude, we need to mobilize all the possible resources so they join to Libraries Without Borders. Writers, prestigious writers have done this already. We need to make sure that the intellectual, cognitive, cultural and creative dimension of every human being is taken into account in urgency situations, emergency situations, but not only. Why? Because emergency situations keep on multiplying on our planet. So we must make sure that international institutions understand how the sense of this and take part in this very large movement. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Michel, for this very personal testimony, but also testimony going towards action. This moves us a lot. Now, I would like to present to you Eva Joly. I know her without really knowing her. Why? Because Eva is well known in France, in the world as well, as a judge, as a jurist. Very quickly she became a judge fighting against corruption, and this had a great impact. The fight against corruption, of course, has a great impact on development as well. There is a very strong link between these two aspects, and there is a huge potential between the reduction of corruption and the opportunity of development. So, given that Eva has also entered politics, it was in a way an intellectual continuity for her. So she is an MEP elected at the European Parliament, and she now chairs the Development Committee. And I see that there is a link between the profession, the past fight of a person, and the present fight of a person. So given that we believe, and Michel can say that too, between book, culture and development, we believe that there is a real substance in emergency situations, just like in more permanent situations. Well, I thought it was very important for Eva Joly to come and speak to us on this subject, on where she is now, where she used to be, where she and her role as a chair of the Development Committee. I would like just to mention an anecdote, if you'll allow me. I had the great pleasure and the luck to meet Eva Joly when I was Prime Minister during the European Days for Development in Stockholm. So at some point we were discussing on very important subjects, and I asked her, "Can I ask you a question?" And she said, "Yes, of course." What made you leave the legal world to become deputy of the European Parliament? So she tilted down her glasses, looked at me and said, "Well, to change the world, very simply." Thank you for this double presentation of Eva Joly.
Merci. Cher Michel.
Dear Michel, dear Patrick, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here today in this great location, a very French location, luxury, calm, where the world is in harmony, where the participants are smart, benevolent, they want to do good. There is a great contrast with the barbarity, the aggressiveness that we can see in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Libya, for instance. I think that when you take the floor, when one takes the floor, it is important to say something which is unique. So we must say what position is adopted when I express myself, when I say something. First, I am talking about the place of the little girl I used to be in Oslo in the 1950s. I came from a poor class where books were not available on an everyday basis, and I have to pay tribute to public libraries, because without them I would never have had an openness to the world, and my landscape, the horizon of my life, probably would have been limited to the factories which were to be found around the region in Oslo. So I know how important the critical role that public libraries can play, and maybe this is the best motivation for my presence here today. Second place I adopt when talking here today, I am the chair of the Development Committee at the European Parliament. As a chair, I am sometimes faced with the feeling of helplessness in front of disasters, in front of financial problems. We manage flows of money, we manage the greatest donations in the world. I am talking about around 60 billion euros. So for the member states, for the European Union, so 60 billion international aid, but I am also talking about the European humanitarian aid, which is which is a significant amount in the world, 1 billion euro. But we have to face need. We have to face the lack of means faced with the constant needs, and the needs are increasing. So this is the fight that the Parliament is leading. The budget is decreasing. We have a lot of selfishness at the national level, and for the first time in our history, the budget for the European Parliament will be reduced, and those who financed, or rather what finances this decrease in the European budget is actually the aid, humanitarian aid, and we try to preserve it. $1 billion to act in Syria, to help Palestine, to help Gaza, the Gaza Strip. This represents half of our budget, and now we are faced with another crisis in Mali. So we could ask ourselves the question, what place should libraries actually play? What role should they play? Well, the first intuition is to say that faced with this lack of means, faced with these disasters, maybe books are not the most important item. But it is just because, unfortunately, we have great disasters, people losing their arms, their legs. Michel knows about all of this. But then, if you reflect a second time, you know that the only wall you can build against barbarism is actually culture and education. And I think this is the third pillar I would like to base my speech on. We have the work within the development committee, but this is a bureaucratic work, and sometimes I am very frustrated. I also work in Afghanistan on behalf of the UN in a equality institution between Afghan people and the international community, my objective there being to fight corruption in Afghanistan. And I can tell you that barbarism is not only the Taliban, it is not only the physical violences. Barbarism is also this absence of references for people. Therefore, people find themselves in the following situation. What can I find in this situation? What is there to gain for me, for my family, for my clan? Therefore, a great part of development aid, humanitarian aid that was brought to Afghanistan actually disappeared. And today, this money is to be found in fiscal havens, especially in Dubai, and no one is actually interested in thinking about the role of Dubai in this money laundering. So fiscal havens are actually a barrier to peace. What is the feeling of an Afghan person in the street, a person who needs everything? Books, culture, first aid, care, when they see that the international community is present but closed down on itself in compounds where it costs 20,000 euros per month per person because you are scared that maybe there is poison in the food you could buy on the markets. So everything is being imported from Dubai. When you look at the 200 billion that were given to the 112 billion that were given to Afghanistan, what did the Afghan population benefit from? Next year, I would like to have a scheme of flows. Right now, we are trying to understand all the infrastructure projects, and we are studying them. Many of them are absurd. Roads were not finished. Roads were built without any consultation, building projects as well. And this supported a great corruption. So on one side, you know this. Some of the infrastructures were useful, but many of them were actually abandoned while they were being constructed. Then on the other side, you know all the money that has been given by international agency. And I am very sad to have to tell you today that even within those agencies, there is a lot of corruption. We were able to establish that even in or rather, even within people in charge of taking care of refugees, and you should go to the refugees camps, the internally displaced persons in Afghanistan, what it looks like. It's actually just a hole in the ground with a bit of plastic available. It is just one tap of water that 1,000 of people have to share. The international community made donations, sent tents, food, care, first aid, etc. But many of this equipment disappears and does not actually relieve people and help them to improve their lives. We led a study on Kabul Bank. Kabul Bank is probably the greatest bank scandal of all times. It represents $900 million, which were used in not a proper way, and 400 million of them are to be found in Dubai. There was money laundering. And we have a former poker player who was condemned in Russia, the brother of the former president, who's a war leader. We had condemnations already, and the only answer of Dubai when they're presented with that file is to say they're not ready to cooperate. So here we recognize our responsibility. The OECD, for instance, has the power to actually blacklist They have the possibility to blacklist the United Arab Emirates, just like they are able, if they want to blacklist other fiscal havens, other tax havens, and probably we would have no problem whatsoever to actually finance $1 billion, $10 billion that could be sent to your projects, the urgency of reading, if we were to do this. So the situation we are faced with is a complex situation. And when I was preparing for today's conference, I tried to understand what was the amount of our aid within the European Union that is actually dedicated to culture. Because with you, I think there is something we share. I am talking about the idea that culture, theater, literature represent our common house. They allow us to build the future together. And I thought that some staff at the European Union were very efficient to say that the European Commission has very performing tools, they use satellites, they use internet, and in the end I understood that there was no budgetary line dedicated to culture when it comes to development aid.
Humanitaire, non plus.
And there was no budgetary line either for humanitarian aid when it comes to culture. So today, is it important to actually create that budgetary line? Well, maybe not. Because what we need to do is actually to change the approach we have, the way we think about these topics. Michel knows it. The aid which was brought to Haiti was not a full success. We have the documentary by Raoul Peck, which is called Assistance Mortelle, Deadly Assistance. This shows that the great volume and the richness of the humanitarian machine was actually helpless when it came to actually reach the original objectives. Why? Well, probably because in Haiti, just like everywhere else, like always, what we did was to bring our culture, our way of organizing, our way of managing crisis, our way of thinking about reconstruction without integrating the Haitian people or without integrating them enough. We are not the ones who should choose and give and offer alternatives. If we really want to be efficient, we need to make sure that the local population take ownership of the help, of the aid. They need to define themselves what are the priorities. This is done in some sectors, so why couldn't we do it for the humanitarian aid as well? We should shift the way we work in order to finish the dysfunctioning of humanitarian aid. We should trust the local stakeholders because they know how to make demands, and they know, they did it, for instance, when they called on Libraries Without Borders just a few days after the earthquake. We should support their initiatives. We should not invent them for them. What I also want to say is that I do not have the feeling that it is necessary to ask international organizations or European organizations when it comes to have a budgetary line to culture. I think we should ask the populations to express their wish. We should ask donors to associate themselves to the programs of the countries which are struck by natural disasters or humanitarian disasters. When the countries ask for books, theaters, etc., the aid stemming from the European Fund for Development and other tools for development aid from the European Union could be used and redirected to culture. I am talking about DCI, for those of you who know about it. So we should redirect the aid according to the urgent needs expressed by the populations, because the populations are able to organize themselves by themselves. So they do not want us to actually think for them how they should face a crisis and manage it. Of course, we have many barriers when it comes to integrating culture, especially when you see that culture is completely absent of all the communications of the European Commission. We need to enhance the impact of our action at the European Parliament. We have now the Programme for Change. It is the new Bible of the European institutions, but culture is not mentioned in that programme. But what I can say is that you can count on my help. I will promote, I will defend this idea. I will start by sharing it with the members of the Development Committee at the European Parliament. And Patrick, Michel, I would like you to come at the European Parliament at the beginning of 2014, so we can have a hearing with the Commission present in order for us to actually, or rather in order for you to be able to specifically express your needs. Maybe you could actually share with us the first successes, the first results of the IDs box, so we can go forward and find a way forward. Well, I think that we could also launch an initiative, a very simple initiative. For instance, we could open in every single French library a gathering of books. Basically, every single citizen could drop a book that is intended for countries with an urgency of reading. Well, dear Michel, dear Patrick, I will conclude by saying the following. I will quote Léopold Ségar Sándor, who said that he always thought that the human being, that culture was at the beginning and at the end of development. It is now up to us and up to you to act in order for culture to be both at the beginning and at the end of humanitarian aid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva. Thank you, Michel. You enlightened us with your reflections. This closing session has been wonderful. Thanks to you. It's the end of the conference. It really is the closing session now. I'll ask Jérémy and Mr. Blin to come to the panel. Thank you.